All right, welcome everyone. Today we are going to be looking at history and we're going to be examining what it really means. And was there ever a time before history? And the answer to that riddle is yes. Yes, there was. And all we really have to do is quickly define what history really is and what it isn't. See, history is this really kind of interesting format. And it's probably not too hard to kind of wrap your head around because if I was to ask you, how do we know something had happened? I'm sure the first thing you're going to say is one of two things. Either one, I was told it happened, or two, I read about it. See, history is the study of past events based on writing from those events. People writing about what they experienced, what they saw, what they felt, what they basically went around through and came to that general principle, whatever it happens to be. They experienced it firsthand. We call that firsthand or primary resources. Or we might have somebody who writes about someone else's experiences, and that would be a secondary resource. Either way, in both instances, it's about writing. It's about writing about those events, whatever they happen to be. So anything before writing is pre-history. The basic fundamental breakdown of it is anything that happens before we have written accounts is prehistory. And there are some key things that happened in the prehistory movement. We look at hunting and gathering, we look at agriculture, we look at complex societies and whether or not those things were invented before we had writing or after we had writing, and we try to do our best to figure out where these civilizations, if they exist, where they did and why they did exist in those particular instances. Most of our most advanced pre-civilization societies existed about 3,500 BCE, or before Common Era. And they last to about 500 BCE, or again, before Common Era. So we know history is before written records, before those documents that tell us for sure this exact thing happened. If I were to ask you to go research something about anything with World War II, or World War I, or Vietnam, or the war in Iraq, all you would have to do is open a history book and you'd be finding some historian that gave you a firsthand synopsis of those events. And they have those events because either A, they experienced them themselves, or B, more importantly and more probable, they probably just read other resources and got a general perspective of the incidents and the people at large. So we look at documentation and we figure out if there is or is not. And whenever happened that doesn't have documentation, we look at that as prehistory, before writing. Before writing. So how do we know stuff happened if there's no written account? What are we looking for then to figure out what happened to humans or pre-humans or other versions that happened before us? Well, we're going to look at the archaeological record, anything that they left behind, stuff. We're going to look at their things and figure out what they had and what they used those things for to the best of our ability. We're basically trying to figure out a narrative based on what we know to be true. We're going to be trying our best to kind of piece back their lives as best we can. Now, we have a interesting kind of thing to map out. Oftentimes people ask, well, what makes humans different from animals? What makes them different from animals? What makes all of us different from animals? And there's a really straightforward answer, but there's a lot of wrinkles to why this is the way it is. See, animals adapt themselves to their environment. They look at the environment and they look at, how am I going to survive in this environment? Do I need to move because it's not hospitable? And do I need to adapt in some way, shape, or form to become more survivable in that area of the world? See, hominids, or early humans, or the group of people we look at from humans, the hominid is just a larger perspective that encompasses multiple species that we are going to talk about. A hominid adapts their environment to them. They change their surroundings. They change the game. See, animals didn't necessarily have the ability to build things, to build buildings, right? They might have birds build nests, sure. And there are some general geographic features that are used by animals. But hominids are going to build around those environments, and they're going to adapt the environment to them. They're going to eventually have complex structures. They're going to set up the use of tools. They're going to invent languages. They're going to have complex and cooperative social dynamics. There's going to be this new structure that's going to eventually form. And that's different among hominids versus every other animal species. Now, in the animal kingdom, you might have heard this once or twice. There's your alphas and there's everybody else. Like, for instance, the lion that is the alpha of the pride. There's one guy that's basically running the show. And most of the hunting is done by the female lioness and her pack, basically. But that one lion is the alpha. And he kind of scares off and defends the territory because he's bigger, stronger, and that's his job, is to defend the area that they know to be true. He is the Mufasa of lions when it comes to defending his little pride on Pride Rock. But hominids are different. Hominids start to invent new ways to adapt everything else around them as opposed to what they're just experiencing. They have more control, or at least they try to exert more control over what their surroundings are. Now, there are a couple of different species that we're going to be looking at, and the later hominids, they're the ones that we really should be focusing on. We have Homo erectus, which is an upright walking human. They're not quite normal human sized, or what we would think of as modern human, but they are decent as far as brain capacity. They use improved tool making. They control fire. They have the ability to communicate with complex ideas. They have languages. Their brains are about 1,000 cc. About 1,000 cc. Homo sapiens, they're consciously thinking humans. That's what Homo sapien refers to, a consciously thinking human. They're the largest brain among the different hominid species. They have more sophisticated tools than any other group. They have much more complex social organization, and they have a flexible language where it's more adaptable, where they make up words to, understand their surroundings. Now, migrations occurred between both of these groups, Homo erectus and Homo sapiens, but eventually the only ones that are going to reign supreme, or at least be the ones that are left, are going to be the Homo sapiens. By about 15,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were in every habitable region of the world. And the reason why they're the ones that will survive, or at least the modern human are going to be the ones that survive, is because of their ability to adapt to the environment. They are able to create more complex tools. So Homo erectus is going to die off, or at least be integrated into and eventually disappear from the general historical record. We're going to be looking at the different kinds of tools like axes or rudimentary knives or bows, arrows, different types of cutting instruments. The use of fire, animal skins, all of that that's going to be a new, more advanced version of everything that's come before. And hunting is going to be pushed several animals all the way to extinction. We're going to see hunting and overhunting occur. Climate change occurs to some degree. It's always occurred. And we're going to see that it's going to increase at an accelerated pace because we're going to have Homo sapiens start to adapt the environment to them. So now we're going to look at a couple of different groups of societies. And this is a more naming convention. We're going to go over what this means. We have the Paleolithic Era, meaning Old Stone Age. Lithic is Stone Age. Paleo is old. And we look at the Paleolithic Era as nomadic existence. People who are moving from point to point, and they have small groups of people. There is division of labor. but not necessarily in a in a way that's not fair. Basically, everyone is going to pull their own weight. They're going to be looking at a way to have a relatively gender free equality where everyone has a function. Men are going to be primarily for protein, for hunting. They're going to be looking at basically hunting the animals. Women primarily are going to be dealing with plant growing, but all of the groups are going to be equal in their significance. There's not going to be one job that's more important than the other. Everyone does their part, and everyone is important. We call this relative gender equality. Relative gender equality. It's the first time and the only time in human existence that we have had relative gender equality, where there was never a real system where we had one group higher than the other, at least not at the first. We see evidence of intelligent coordination of hunting expeditions. We have development of weaponry, tactics. We have the people using animal skins for disguises. All of that comes into the thought process of big game hunting. So finding ways to corner, say, an elephant or something large, and how are they going to beat something so large and defeat it when they aren't anywhere near physically imposing enough? How are they going to do that? They're going to understand that they're going to adapt to the environment around them, and they're going to effectively make tools to get around this problem. The Neanderthal, they are going to be a group of people who are going to rival the Homo sapiens. They're going to be stronger, and they're going to be the main contenders. But eventually, the thing that separates the Neanderthal and the Homo sapiens is the creativity of the Homo sapiens. The brain power is, in effect, the biggest difference between them. And we're going to see the Homo sapiens effectively push the Neanderthal out of existence because of the fact that they just don't leave anything left for them. There's no hunting game for them. There's no plant life left for them to harvest, and eventually the Neanderthal die out. All right, the Neolithic Era. Neo meaning new, lithic again meaning Stone Age. So we have the new Stone Age. We look at the distinction between chipped versus polished tools. So where you might have a rock that's chipped away and it becomes a little bit sharper, that would be Paleolithic. If you're going to take that same rock and start to polish it and smooth it out, we're going to start to look at that as possibly in the Neolithic or New Stone Age. And the reason why is because the tools are going to start becoming more status symbols. They're going to be there as something to show prominence of this individual over someone else, because they have something that shows their distinction as to something that they have that's a little bit better than the traditional rock or traditional cutting tool. Think about it this way. There have been a lot of people that like video game systems. If you're familiar with video game systems, we have the PlayStation, we have the Xbox, and now they're coming out with the PlayStation 5. It would be like if someone had a regular PlayStation, a normal PlayStation from 2002, 2003 era, and someone got a brand new PS5. The person who has the brand new PS5 has an obvious difference in performance, and they look at those and go, oh, you have a better tool than I do. And there is that little bit of envy that kind of creeps in. Or maybe you just want to be really good friends with the person that has that particular new device because it's something that you don't have. That's going to be more or less some of the stuff that deals with the Neolithic era. This reliance on status symbols is going to start to become part of it. We start to see a shift in the agricultural environment. Farming is going to be big. See, Neolithic, one of the biggest things about Neolithic civilizations is they are not going to be dependent on hunting anymore. They are going to hunt, but they're going to, more than anything, they're going to start herding animals. So you have cows that are going to be farmed and fenced in. They're going to have goats and sheep and various other animals, all helping the society, but they're going to farm them and keep them in confinement and eventually send them to slaughter, and they're going to actually have them breed so that they have more of them year to year. We're going to start to see these kinds of apparatus set up within Neolithic society. Women are going to have a shift in role as well. They're going to be looking at generally keeping the farms and their logistics going forward, as opposed to foraging. They're going to make sure that the farms are tended to, that the plants are being watered correctly and they're growing the right way. Women are going to be basically the backbones of society in the Neolithic era. We're going to see the spread of agriculture sweep through these ancient civilizations, because this is going to be where civilization is going to be tamed by Homo sapiens. It's going to be looked at as something of a new frontier to be manipulated, to be harnessed, to be honed. And they're going to look at this and say, well, we want to adapt the world to us. And how are we going to do that? By instead of going the Paleolithic route of having to forage and we're going to have to hunt with the game, because you had to constantly move with that. With the Paleolithic model, you had to move with the game. Otherwise, you were going to not have food after too long. The animals would move on, just like all of the animals that migrate constantly. They move from place to place as the seasons transition, and so would the humans. They would have to follow them. So we're going to be looking at why this occurs and what this effect is, as far as humans are going to now set up settlements where they're going to stay in one place. They're not going to necessarily follow animals anymore. They're going to herd them, and they're going to start farming. And they're going to start increasing their ability to maintain in one spot. And as soon as that happens, we see a population explosion occur. We see the population growth as exponential rates. Because once you have the ability to stay in one place, all of a sudden, you can set down roots. And you don't have to worry so much about how many kids are being born into your society. See, a Paleolithic society is about 20 to 30 or so people at a time. Now, if you all have, a few kids, all of a sudden there's a lot of mouths to feed, and you have to constantly move. And when everyone is working with this group to make sure that the society continues on, the more people that survive to adulthood is actually a detriment, because that's more food that you have to provide as the group. And eventually there's only so many things that can occur. And usually what happened was those small civilizations that were moving around would split into other small groups, and one would go one direction, one would go left, the other one would go right, and they would never see each other again. And they would continue that process. So we're going to be looking at how this exponential growth, how this agricultural revolution that occurs, and how this herding of animals occur. And then what does that do? Well, now you don't have to worry about whether or not the children are going to necessarily be taken out by a random animal while you're off hunting. Or you don't have to worry about having the food year to year, because you can plan out your harvest. You can grow more food if you think you're going to need it as a society. You can try to get more animals to breed with each other so you have more livestock, and you can go through that whole process knowing that you're going to need more meat from the next group of animals that you are going to be cultivating. We're going to see the emergence of villages and towns. You may have remembered, if you have any kind of knowledge of stories from the Bible, there is a town that's a historical town called Jericho. And we're going to see Jericho as one of the first real big settlement areas, and we're going to look at how all of that goes together. We're going to see the establishment of different types of arts and crafts that are going to be inside of human existence. Pottery, metallurgy, textile production. And all of this is not stuff that happens overnight. It happens over a very, very long period of time, but only occurs because humans start to settle in areas of the Middle East, specifically in Mesopotamia, or the land between two rivers. The accumulation of land initiated the development of social classes. So as we start getting more land, or at least they start to cultivate more land, all of a sudden we start to see an arbitrary social class or social fabric be developed, where you start to see the strong chieftain come in as the leader of a tribe, and then his confidants, his lieutenants are going to be wealthier individuals. We're going to start to see this group kind of form almost out of nowhere. Where before in the Paleolithic era, there was no real difference between you or someone else. All of a sudden, as we start to see the accumulation of stuff, we're starting to see the difference of social classes. And we're going to see that as we go forward from the archaeological record. Neolithic culture has farmers that closely observe the natural world and early kind of applied science. They're going to test theories and they're going to experiment in other ways. Yes, very rudimentary ways, but they're still going to experiment because they want to know. They want to know what's different. They're going to make up whatever they need to be able to understand their reality. They're going to look up at the stars and they're going to see the constellations and they're going to say, this must be because of the gods, or some variation thereof. They're going to try to explain their existence, because all up until their life at that point, existence had been manipulated by them to serve them. So they're going to do that, and they're going to keep doing that. They're going to look at all of the different ways that they can enhance their life by manipulating and controlling their environment. Archaeological evidence of religious worship, thousands of clay figurines start to be found. We see drawings, we see pots, we see decorations, other ritual objects. All of that is going to be something that we're going to be looking at. For instance, one of the biggest and most foundational object that is found in basically every single Neolithic society in early times that we have found, they have some kind of what we call Venus figurines or fertility object. Something that is supposed to be symbolizing the fertility of the female bearing children. All of that is going to be something that we're going to be looking at. The origins of urban life are going to start to look at the crafting specialization, social stratification, meaning we're going to start to see that social dynamic, new classes emerge where we have workers and trade skill people. Eventually, we're going to have, unfortunately, the politicians. We're going to see governance. We're going to see new groups of people come together and say we should form governments and we should have some kind of law structures, and we're going to see what that looks like later on. We're going to see cultural workers, people who want to better their communities, and we're going to see eventually, as a gradual process, the creation of cities. And that's where we are going to be looking at going forward. We're looking at how all of this stuff goes together, and we're going to be paying attention to the civilizations that come out of what this group has done. We went from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, the Old Stone Age to the New Stone Age, and we focused in on the changes and the differences. So I want you to look at those particular differences in the reading. I want you to look at all of that, and we're going to come back together and we're going to break down these two different things, the Paleolithic and the Neolithic.